sneak out. Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain Kickboxer, Vengeance. This movie tells the story of a man who goes on an adventure in Thailand to avenge the death of his brother. He trained hard to beat the master kickboxer. Will he be able to avenge his brother's death? Let's find out in Kickboxer, Vengeance. Kickboxer, Vengeance begins when Kurt, a young American man, visits Thailand to study with a master kickboxer fighter named Tong Po. When visiting Tong Po Hermitage, it was not easy for him to meet the master directly. He had to face several of Tong Po's men by fighting one-on-one. First, he must fight with Kavi, a young drunken blonde man who guards the Hermitage's entrance. In the first fight, Kurt can beat Kavi easily because Kavi is drunk. Furthermore, Kurt fights with other Tong Po's men named Storm. This strong man with black dreadlocks can overthrow Kurt with just one kick. All of Tong Po's men attended a dinner together and continued kickboxer training in the evening. Tong Po then shows how to crush a large rock. He approached a stone that stood straight in front of him. The height of the stone is almost the same as the height of his posture. Within seconds, with a single kick, he could destroy the rock. After that, Tong Po's assistant asks if anyone wants to train with the master. But none of Tong Po's men wanted to train with him. They prefer to practice with their fellow college students. Not long after, two of Tong Po's men began to practice fighting. Kurt did not expect that Tong Po's two men's training sessions would end in the death of one of the fighters. That night, after everyone was asleep, Kurt broke into Tong Po's room and intended to kill him at gunpoint. Unfortunately, Tong Po already knows that Kurt's purpose for coming to his hermitage in Thailand is to kill him. Kurt actually wanted revenge because his older brother named Eric died in a match against Tong Po a few months ago. The scene moves to 3 months earlier in America. Eric is a young man who is famous for always winning kickboxer matches and earning a lot of gold medals. Unexpectedly, he received an invitation from a woman named Marcia. Marcia gives Eric an offer to get huge prize money if he wants to fight in Thailand against Tong Po. Marcia also explained that there were no rules during the match and there would be no referee overseeing this match. All it takes is the instinct in kickboxer competition and how to win the match. This clearly shows if the match is illegal. Besides being tempted by the prize money offered by Marcia, Eric also felt challenged and confident of winning the match in Thailand, so he immediately accepted the challenge. Kurt disagrees with the idea of his brother going to Thailand to take part in an illegal kickboxer match. He asked Eric to focus more on his gym business in America and only compete in legal matches. His brother ignored Kurt's request. Eric still goes to Thailand alone and competes with Tong Po. Long story short, Eric wants his younger brother to witness the match he will face, so he sent a plane ticket and his medal so that Kurt was moved and wanted to follow him to watch him compete in Thailand. Kurt arrived in Thailand and went straight to the match venue. There he saw many spectators cheering, and it turned out that when he saw the arena, his older brother, Eric, was fighting Tong Po. Eric looks helpless and is poorly beaten by Tong Po. At the end of the match, a battered Eric died horribly at the hands of Tong Po. Not long after, the match venue was raided by the police, but Tong Po managed to escape by leaving Eric's body lying in the middle of the arena. Kurt sat beside the body of his dead brother, crying. At the police station, a beautiful policewoman named Liu strongly condemns the illegal matches because there are always deaths and Tong Po always manages to escape the law. However, Liu's colleague, Watona, only smiled when he heard Liu's complaint without commenting. Elsewhere, Kurt is mourning his brother's body, which is already in the morgue for an autopsy. It was also seen that Watona was there to keep an eye on Kurt. Not long after, Marcia came to the morgue and the angered Kurt tried to choke her. Luckily, Kurt and Marcia can be separated. Then Watona, who turned out to be in cahoots with Marcia, asked his men to take Kurt to the house of the person who coached Eric before the match and ensure that he took the money from the match and left Thailand as soon as possible. When Kurt arrived in a house in Bangkok, he met Master Durand, who had coached Eric before his match with Tong Po. Durand, a middle-aged man, then gave the remaining money to Kurt. Kurt blamed Durand for not training his brother seriously enough that he had to take his life in the deadly match. Watona's men took Kurt to the airport and asked him to return to America as soon as possible. However, Kurt managed to sneak out of the airport and get into the Tong Po Hermitage to take revenge. The scene changes when Kurt is pointing a gun at Tong Po in his room. However, when Kurt intends to kill him, it turns out that Tong Po has managed to turn things around. With speed invisible to the eye, he moved his hand and took the gun from Kurt's hand. Not long after, Kurt fell to the ground. At the same time, the police have surrounded Tong Po Hermitage. Liu came and took Kurt out of there. Seeing that, Tong Po's assistant asked his men to kidnap the policewoman. On the way, Kurt, who was in the same car as Liu, was confronted by Tong Po's men. They fight in the middle of the road and create traffic jams. Kurt alone against Tong Po's men, who are quite a lot in number. When he saw that Liu was about to be kidnapped, he tried to help her, and they managed to escape from the pursuit of Tong Po's men by running towards Durand's house. While staying at Durand's house to heal his wounds, Kurt asks him to train him to fight Tong Po. Durand finally agreed to train Kurt because he saw his strong determination. After recovering from his injuries from fighting with Tong Po's men, Kurt begins his physical training. He practiced all day tirelessly. Time has changed and Kurt is getting stronger in training. After seeing Kurt's improved physique and abilities, Durand brought him to a kickboxer fight venue. Kurt was asked to fight a formidable local fighter because no one could beat him. Kurt launched an attack, but his efforts were to no avail. Instead, he was increasingly desperate and unable to fend off the opponent's attack. He then lost the match with the local fighter. Finally, Durand came down to defend Kurt. He challenges the local fighter and a fight begins. The local fighter was knocked down by Durand and fell to the ground with just one hit. The next day, Durand trained Kurt even harder. While training Kurt, suddenly one of Tong Po's assistants named Kavi came and begged to be trained by Durand. He told him that he had been kicked out of the Tong Po hermitage because he kept drinking. Durand initially rejects Kavi. However, Kavi continued to talk about Eric's defeat by saying that Durand was incompetent to train Eric, and his insults made his anger rise. Durand then beats Kavi and they fight. Kavi's ability that has not been able to match Durand's skill in kickboxer fights makes him easily defeated by Durand. In the end, Durand then accepts Kavi and teaches him to fight. Furthermore, Kurt and Kavi underwent physical training together. They were also taught to release Tong Po's locking moves when fighting. This locking move is tough to release and can cause his opponents to die. After feeling capable enough, Kurt came to the Tong Po hermitage to challenge him to a match. Before accepting the fight, Tong Po asks Kurt to fight one of his men first. Tong Po asked Storm to fight Kurt because when Kurt first came to the hermitage, Storm could defeat him with just one kick. However, the current Kurt is no longer the old Kurt. He had trained very strongly and improved his fighting skills. The battle with Storm begins. However, the fight went very quickly because Kurt could defeat Storm with one kick and made him fall to the ground. Seeing his men defeated, Tong Po accepts Kurt's challenge to compete the following day. The battle plan between Kurt and Tong Po actually reached the police because they had installed a sound tapping device on Kurt's body without him knowing. Liu finds out that the broker of the illegal fight is Marcia. Police began to watch Marcia's movements. The next day, Liu and her men then arrested Kurt and Durand. This was done to protect Kurt from competing against Tong Po. They were both put in the prison room. While in prison, it turns out that Kurt and Durand can easily escape by tricking the police, and they run as fast as possible to the match venue. The match time has come for Kurt to fight against Tong Po. The fight will be conducted in 3 rounds. In the first round they will fight empty-handed. Next, in the second and third rounds they will fight using weapons. Fighters will be declared victorious if one of them dies. The first round begins. Tong Po easily beat Kurt and ward off all attacks launched by Kurt. Instead, Kurt had to accept the blows and kicks directed at him. Kurt was already starting to get battered in this first round. Not long after, the bell rang and the first round was over. The second round continues. Kurt and Tong Po wrapped their hands with a piece of cloth and attached it to the shards of glass. In this round, Kurt launched a few attacks on Tong Po, even though the attacks were not comparable to the attacks made by Tong Po on him. Kurt's face and body scratches were badly due to Tong Po's attack. The second round ended with Kurt lying in the middle of the arena. During the break, it turned out that the police had surrounded the arena outside. Liu, who had come to break up the match, saw Marcia and immediately ordered her men to arrest her. Meanwhile, in the competition arena, Durand motivates Kurt by saying that Tong Po is also a human whose body can be injured and bones can be broken. Durand then orders Kurt to attack Tong Po's head. Liu and her men had already entered and were in the spectator seats while standing watching the game. From a distance she saw Kurt's tenacity when fighting because she knew Kurt had come to fight to avenge his brother. Liu then let the match continue until the end. The third round begins. Fighters now use swords as weapons, unlike the previous rounds. At the beginning of this third round, the fighters' performance looked balanced until each of the swords they held fell off. Finally, they continued the match empty-handed. Tong Po issued his flagship move in locking the opponent. Kurt remembered that this was the technique Tong Po used to kill his brother. However, because he had practiced hard to release this locking move, Kurt managed to free himself from Tong Po's grip and counterattacked until Tong Po finally fell helpless. Tong Po's body lay limp in the middle of the arena. Even though he managed to cripple Tong Po, Kurt didn't mean to kill him. With unsteady steps, he walked out of the arena. Unexpectedly, Tong Po was able to get up and attack Kurt again. Kurt then strikes back at Tong Po and the knife that Tong Po is holding hits himself. The match ended with the death of Tong Po in the arena. Kurt crouched beside Tong Po's body to make sure his opponent didn't move anymore, and he took the amulet he was wearing and showed it to the audience. There were cheers from the audience, who were so rowdy seeing Kurt's victory. Liu smiled happily from the stands, and Durand cheered with joy that Kurt had won the match. At the end of the story, Kurt and Liu are about to leave Thailand. Liu will quit her job as a policewoman and go with Kurt to America. Kurt then vowed never to return to Thailand again. Meanwhile, Kavi will become Kurt's assistant by joining them in America. The film ends.